So what are the roles involved here in SIAM?
We've got 3 layers in a Siam model. So we've got the customer organisation, which they're the ones who will own any contracts with the service providers. They're the ones who will have the internal teams. And what the customer organisation tends to keep is some retained capabilities. So there'll be some things which are not kind of passed to the service integrator, and that could be things like strategy, governance, it could be security and risk management, the things that we want to retain. But they will work very closely with the service integrator, and they'll set expectations as well. So the service integrator is the next layer, and this is a function. So it might be 2 people, it might be 200 people. It depends on the size and the scope of what's included in there. And the service integrator can be internal, so it can be created with staff from the customer organisation, in which case you've got to be very careful to make sure the 2 things are distinct. It can be staffed externally, so the big companies like TCS, Atos, Capgemini, Infosys, they all provide that kind of service. Or it can be kind of a sort of a hybrid and a mix of internal and external staff. And then underneath that, you've got the service providers themselves. So as we discussed, these can be internal teams, these can be external, but the whole point is that the service integrator is focused on having them working together, and the service integrator will put in place things like regular meetings, process forums, governance boards that are all in place to kind of build these relationships and encourage this sort of cross-service provider working, because it's a question that a lot of organisations ask is, why on earth would I want to collaborate with a competitor in a Siam model? These other external service providers, these are organisations that I compete with in the open market. So some of that from the service integrator's perspective is, how do we sell the benefits? And a lot of the benefits for the service providers are about having that certainty, understanding not just their little piece of the jigsaw, but the big picture. When is it time to invest? What are the benefits for me? And the sort of the flip side of that is, if you as a service provider are taking the attitude that actually, I'm not going to work with anybody else, I'm not going to collaborate, you do have to ask yourself how long that contract is going to last for. Will you be getting renewal at the end of your term, because you're not really displaying behaviours that are particularly positive to the organisation that's ultimately writing the checks.
True. So what is the recommended thing here to actually get the service integrator from competitive organizations, or it could be a kind of an independent body?
The trend that we see in this comes from the Global Siam survey, is a move more towards internal service integrators. So obviously we only see the data, we don't see the reasons why that's happened. It may be perhaps that organisations have not been happy with the service that they're getting from some of these big organisations. One area that I've seen a little bit of conflict is, one of the service integrator models is a lead supplier as service integrator. And what that means is, you could have an organisation like TCS acting as the service integrator, but also delivering some of the services within the Siam model. And that can create some challenges in terms of, selling this idea that the service integrator is independent and not showing any favoritism. It is possible to do it, and it is possible to do it well, but it requires things like kind of separate resources, separate teams, huge amount of transparency to show that things are being managed appropriately and there's no favoritism. But like I say, certainly the trend that we're seeing is to bring the service integrator back in-house, which it is an interesting one, because that does create those challenges of, how do you maintain the distinction between the service integrator and the customer organisation itself, so that that they all they all come with difficulties, and I suspect, as with many things in IT, it's fairly cyclical, and what we'll see in another, say, 5 years will be the shift back to external and then round again.
Right. So is there a model which says there would be some internal service integrators and there are some external service integrators too?
Yeah, you can build what we call a hybrid service integrator, which is some external resources and some internal resources. And quite often this is done when an organisation wants to move towards an internal service integrator, but they maybe don't have the skills and the capabilities at the moment. So if they bring in some external people to support the internal resources, knowledge share, upskill, then, quite often what you see with a hybrid model is ultimately it becomes an internal service integrator, but bolstered by the knowledge that they've had from these external resources, because you can do Siam from, a sort of a zero knowledge base. But as with anything, you can accelerate progress by bringing in people who have experience. For example, contracts in a Siam model, there are things that you can include in the contracts, like collaboration agreements, that help to encourage your service providers to integrate. And if you've never done the Siam implementation before, you won't have any knowledge of those. Whereas if you have somebody who comes in, they can stop you making mistakes that cost time, cost money. It's always helpful to have that advice from somebody who's got the experience.
True. Yeah, it might need the additional capabilities of as a leader, right? You have to communicate and collaborate with multiple teams and then getting ahead with different and conflicting priorities.
Yep.
They might not be on the same platform as well.
Yes.
So the challenges you have and what is the best way to solve?
I mean, every Siam transformation is different. And we have this kind of roadmap that we describe in the Siam body of knowledge, and that there's challenges at each stage. But in a way, we can look at it as an organisational change, and the challenges in that instance will come in the areas that we're all familiar. People challenges. In quite a lot of Siam transformations, you have some movement of people. So you might have, for example, staff who worked in the customer organisation who, could possibly getting made redundant, could be actually moved across into the service integrator, so a new employer and a new role. So the people challenges are huge, because it's a big change, and all of the sort of the standard OCM techniques apply there, communicating what's happening, when, why, trying to get people involved as much as possible. So that the people challenges will always, I guess, probably be the greatest ones. But then technology challenges as well. You mentioned the fact that everybody might not be working on the same platform, and this is a big consideration in a Siam transformation, is how are you going to link information? What's the tooling strategy? And that can be, it can be maybe the customer organisation has a platform like ServiceNow. They require all of their service providers to use that. It can be that all of the different players involved have their own platform, but we use integration capabilities to link them all together. There's software like For.Me, which is kind of specifically designed with Siam in mind. But getting that tooling strategy right is really important. And again, in the Siam survey, we ask people, is the tool that they're using fit for purpose? And we do have, fairly significant numbers of people saying, actually, no, it's not fit for purpose. And kind of worst case scenario in that instance is you have, information being extracted from one system and then manually uploaded into another, with all the risks that come with that, of human error or lost in translation. So there's tooling issues as well, and process is another one, because what happens in Siam is you have an end-to-end process, which, you know, is linked to the end-to-end service, but it doesn't mean that the service integrator is doing all of the heavy lifting in terms of process work. And it's kind of a common misconception about Siam is that the service integrator is doing all of the process work. In fact, what happens is each of the service providers maintains their own ways of working. So they'll have still, you know, their own incident management, their own change management, and they might be running in a very traditional ITIL fashion. They might be running in a real sort of agile DevOps fashion. It doesn't actually matter as long as they can plug into these end-to-end processes. You know, what we need to understand is if there is an incident, how do we pass it to a service provider? How do we make sure that we still have the information and the updates because we're tracking the progress of that? But then, you know, what that service provider does, we don't mind as long as we get the information that they need. They can write it down on a piece of paper and pass it around by hand if that's what they want to do, as long as they can report back to the service integrator.
So it is all about different formats, different tools, but integrating it in a common platform, right?
Yeah.
What would be the process to roll out Siam? Would it be piloted somewhere and then it goes ahead, or it has been like from the top, it goes and then probably you say, okay, this is the big picture, and then everybody has to do that.
I wish it worked like that. Everybody has to do this. I mean, again, there's different ways you can do it, and one of the big things with Siam is starting with a really strong business case, because you are undertaking a project which is going to be, you know, quite disruptive, potentially quite expensive, ultimately to deliver benefits, but there is this process that you need to work through, and how you go about that will depend again on, I guess, if you're in that sort of greenfield or legacy environment, because if you're going in greenfield, it is much simpler to say everybody does this, because you can write it into all of the contracts. You know, ideally, the service integrator is there from day one. They're helping you select the suppliers. They're helping you write the contracts. That's simple. If it is a legacy environment, you may have to renegotiate some contracts. You may be terminating some contracts. There might be some contracts where you let them expire, but you accept that perhaps that particular supplier won't be integrating into the Siam model, and you've got to work around that. So there is, I guess, if we call it phased versus big bang, you know, there is a big bang option, but for a lot of organizations, it does need to be phased. I mean, I'm working with an organization at the moment. We're doing some consultancy with them, and they're moving from a single monolithic agreement with a service provider that's doing everything. They're moving to a Siam model, so they'll have lots of different suppliers involved, but there are different pieces are coming back at different times. So it's not that this one contract will hit the end date and then everything comes back. It's gradually coming back, and things are being integrated into the Siam model as each piece comes across, and as they've built the capabilities internally in order to be able to deal with that and manage that. And it is the same with tooling as well. In a perfect world, the customer organization is able to say, this is the tool that we're using and everybody has to do it. But in the real world, quite often that's not what happens. And this is a bit of an emerging area in Siam, is how do we actually deal with suppliers like, for example, AWS, who form a crucial part of our services, but we can't make them integrate into our platform. They're not coming to our monthly meetings. We're not having this collaborative relationship. So it's looking at strategies to still make sure that you have the information you need in terms of things like AWS. You know, how would it work if there was an incident? What happens if there's a change? And it's kind of developing strategies to cope with that. But that's That's a question we're being asked a lot at the moment in terms of, how do I integrate cloud providers into a Siam model? And it's developing different techniques to do that.
Right. So probably it might be like related with what we work also. So kind of we are into process automation and RPA, robotics process automation. So we integrate almost 400 plus systems. You come up with any tool, we just integrate them. Our tool will come and then fetch the data in kind of a ETL and then integrate it and then execute the tasks. So it is not just getting the data and information and insight, acting on that insight, okay, what to do. So that part also in the automated fashion, that process flow itself would be automated by the tool and then data will be interconnected and there are multiple integrations available. So what I come towards that is like probably in a single organization itself, there are multiple platforms. Say, even in a one big organization, there are 13 to 14 platforms, right? So the integration is quite a challenge. So we need certain kind of tool which can integrate each and everything and never force anyone. Okay, I'm using this tool and you have to use this tool only. Then we'll integrate. But it cannot happen, right? So there, I think a lot of challenges are there and a lot of technical advancement has been done here. And then we have available connectors and all those things. However, what do you think there will be like a common dashboard or common SLAs? How it has been managed in typical Siam environment?
So, I mean, this is a great area to talk about, and I'm always fascinated by what we can do with automation. It's a space where I think that the pace of change, particularly in a Siam environment, is really accelerating, because the traditional model was to have one tool set and contractually require your service providers to be working with that tool set, and where they couldn't or wouldn't for whatever reason, then you had something manual that was happening, or you were custom building integrations. Whereas now, with the automation that we've got, it is much simpler, and that there are companies like One.io who are working in this very specific Siam space to build these integrations and to make it easy, so that, again, if you've got a DevOps organization, they tend to have a completely different suite of tools that they're working with when you compare it to, say, an ITIL organization. But we need to be sucking up information from both of them to understand, for example, change management. You might be taking data from an ITSM system from one organization, whereas the other one, you're looking at an automated tool chain and automated testing. And as long as we can bring that information in, that's all we need really from a service integration perspective. So the trend is, I think, moving much more from forcing everybody to use one platform to understanding, I guess, the technical version of Siam. There's all these different technologies. It is possible to integrate them, and then once we've got this view, that the benefits of automation can actually be enormous in a Siam environment, because we can start to look at where in these end-to-end processes that are spanning service providers, where do we have opportunities for automation? Where are we seeing lag? Where have we got unnecessary manual activities? And this is something that is starting to develop, is to have specific automation capabilities within the service integrator. So having a centre for automation, or automation engineers working within the service integrator, looking across the piece and finding these continual improvement opportunities, applying process mining and, like you say, RPA techniques to get things done, either better, faster, more efficiently. This can be a really crucial part of the service integrator role.
Yeah. So how do we actually go with having a common process? Maybe it could be ITIL, or is there any other framework also you use for CI?